Hey, welcome to the second episode of Pan-Levant Podcast. The reason I'm introducing it like this is because we actually began 3 minutes earlier than what you're about to see. One of us just forgot to, it was me. One of us forgot to press the record button. All you missed was a bit of preamble about our guest David being from Montreal and about the colonialisms that compete in Canada between Quebec nationalism, Canadian nationalism, and our legacy of reconciliation with indigenous folks. And that's about it, really. So I hope you enjoy our conversation.
The best name for it, I think the best name for it is Canaan. It's okay. I saw what just
Yeah.
happened. It's okay. Hide. So I do think that the best name for this land is Canaan, but I do make
Amen.
a point of calling it Palestine. But at the time when I'm discovering this land and asking myself, am I part of this land? I'm calling it Israel.
Yeah.
And don't even know that there are Palestinian people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm completely not aware of this at all. I understand that there's people in the area called Arabs. This is
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They will never say Palestinian. They will only say Arabs, right? They will erase the Palestinian identity completely through the term Arab. They say our conflict is with Arabs. There is no Palestinian people, right? Go back to the Golda Meir quote. And so ever since even in American Jewish communities in Hebrew school, right, we were never told the term Palestinian. It was always Arab. And to this day, that's been perpetuated. So
If
I think this
anything,
is a
they say
global.
like Jordan, right? Like they sometimes will
Oh,
mention
yeah,
Jordan,
no.
but they won't ever mention Palestine.
Oh, 100%. Or they say they're all just Arabs go back to Arabia, right? They
Yeah.
colonized the land from the Byzantines who took it from the Romans who took it from the Jews, right? When in reality, they're an indigenous people who descend from the ancient peoples of the land who are rooted in this land. And overall, right, while they might speak a language that necessarily didn't originate in Levant, that does not necessarily matter, right? We are speaking English. Are we Anglo-Saxon? No, right? This is just a
Absolutely
product
not.
of history at the end of the day, right? So, I
Amen.
mean, this is the absurdity of Zionism. But sorry, David, I'm taking up so much time. But back to you. Sorry.
No, this is that's amazing. I want to
Mm,
hear. I definitely want to hear like your what you guys have to say also.
yeah.
Um, we're
So you weren't taught for, so sorry guys, let's just catch up for a second. This wasn't recording. So let me just
Yeah.
reintroduce
I
everything.
caught
So
that.
welcome guys to the Pan-Levant Podcast, episode 2. We have David Aharon and obviously our co-host Elijah Kallenberg. David is currently in Israel and he hails from Canada like me. And yeah, so we were just talking a bit about how growing up, he always felt like there was a system that he felt was unequal or that there was something wrong with it inherently, and not necessarily like he belonged in the country. Which I wanted to also interject and say, like as an immigrant to Canada, I wasn't born in Canada. I'm from Syria. I always felt that way as well. Like as much as I wanted to integrate into the country, there would just be moments where you feel like you're, the black sheep or you're a fish out of water. And I never felt like as much as I'm proud to be Canadian and I'm proud to like be a citizen here and everything, and I like defend our rights and stuff like that. I've always
Mhm.
had a special fealty to Syria, and when the revolution broke out, that only encouraged me to look more into it and learn more about it, and that only like grew my appreciation towards it, right? And so you could like this is where I felt I related to you a lot, and when you were explaining how, growing up you felt there was something wrong, but you didn't have the language to
Yeah.
criticize it. And I feel like reading like Franz Fanon or Edward Said, like these are the kinds of thinkers that teach you to criticize the system that school will never teach you here, you know?
There's a great professor by the name of Foucault. I don't know if any of you know him, but his whole
mhm.
idea is that the language we use governs power in our society, right? So the
Mm,
language that we are using to articulate our ideas are inherently based in a power structure that chose those words. So the words that we use to describe, say, Canada, right? David immediately started off the conversation by giving the indigenous name for Turtle Island, right? The fact that we are inherently calling it Canada is a reflection of that power structure. And so David had an amazing point around that, and I want to give him a big Kol Haka vote for that. It was truly beautiful, for sure. Yeah.
Can we say, by the way, before we get back to that, like So, how long ago did you come to Canada?
When I was 5, so it's been like over 20 years. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm.
And you're Palestini, you're Syrian,
I'm full
or
Syrian. Yeah. Both my parents are Syrian.
Yeah.
um, so we were, yeah, when I said where I come from, I said Mikanako Menisi.
Correct. Yes.
Mhm.
That I remember.
And it would be so wonderful for anyone living in that land to see what it feels like to like really feel what does it feel like to actually say that name
Mm.
as the place that your environment. And it would be an amazing exercise demonstrating how important names are.
Mhm.
Mm. Amen.
But okay, so I just wanted to make sure I said that again.
Yes.
For sure.
That's a good point.
So we got to the point where I'm deciding, okay, I didn't have the language to explain it, but I
Mm.
feel like I'm not from that land.
Mhm.
I honor that land because I'm born on that land.
Mhm.
So in that sense,
Mhm.
I'm native to that land because of the actual word of what native means, but not indigenous because of the culture that
Yeah.
I was
You're
brought
rooted.
into. The culture is not
Yeah.
indigenous. Canadian culture or Quebecois culture, not indigenous. The
Mhm.
Quebecois culture is amazing. It's really cool. It's not indigenous,
Mhm.
and neither is Canadian culture. So
Yeah.
I'm brought into a culture that was born out of a colonial ideology.
Mhm.
It's not there to integrate. It's there to dominate. That's
Mhm.
the major
Amen.
difference.
Yeah.
I begin to see myself as Semitic,
Mm.
passing as white,
Mm.
become connected to what I would call at that time Israel.
Mhm.
Again,
Mhm.
I want to stress that like publicly on my Instagram or on social media, I will call this place Palestine
Mhm.
in order to de-radicalize that idea,
Mhm.
right? A lot of people talk about getting radicalized by this stuff. That's amazing, but also, wait, do you really want to get radicalized or do you want to get grounded?
Yeah.
You want to, and so why not de-radicalize the idea of calling this place Palestine? Because if you really want a Palestinian country from the river to the sea, you're gonna
Mhm.
have to come to the realization that like either you're gonna there's 50% of the population is Jewish.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So what you're saying, if you don't mean ethnic cleansing, what you mean is that 50%, that Jewish population, they will be called Palestinians.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
as they were before like
yeah.
the foundation of Israel, exactly.
And
Yeah.
so part of the way we're going to do that is not radicalization, de-radicalize that feeling that this land is called Palestine.
Mm.
Mm.
And countries, places can have more than one name. And
Yeah.
Israel, historically, part of history, this place was called the Kingdom of Israel,
Mhm.
for about maybe 7 years, not that long,
Yeah.
not that long a
Yeah.
time,
The
but
northern portion.
it was kind of
Yeah.
7 years. David, Shlomo, you
The
know,
home. Yeah.
it was called Israel. The Maccabees, the Hashmonaim, when
Mhm.
they were Jewish and they were able to secure independence from the
From the Greeks.
from Hellenistic or the Seleucids.
Yeah.
They didn't call it Israel. That for 7 years
Mhm.
it was Judea. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
so even then, when there was Jewish independence, it wasn't called Israel.
Mm.
So
Mm.
Israel is a historical name for this place, but for not most of history. For most of history, it was Palestine, and then even before that, it's Canaan,
Yeah.
and that can all be true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
No part of that is contradicting,
Yep.
and depending on what culture you're part of,
Mhm.
is what you're naturally going to call that place.
Right.
and some
Yeah.
people really do. And in fact, even today, like I got to bring up the Shomanim
Mhm.
because it's such a great. The Samaritans, the
Yeah.
Samaritans. Okay, because why do I bring them up at this point? Because it's such a crazy thing that happened. Is that so? Israel is like it's an ancient name for this place, but that if you say you're
Mhm.
Israeli, what's happened is there's this colonizing project called the State of Israel. You're you can't people can't help but think you mean the State of Israel. I think that you identify with the State of Israel if
Mhm.
you say that I'm
Mhm.
Israeli. But Israeli
Yeah.
is what like Ben Israel, who Israeli.
I am from Israel. Yeah.
Somebody Israel in Hebrew, if he's Israeli,
Yeah.
and it is indigenous because of and the Shomanim show us that it's indigenous because if you want to look at an indigenous Israeli, how indigenous Hebrew sounds like, the
Mm.
Shomanim are the Israelis.
Yeah. And
So
their Samaritan
so,
Hebrew has been continued. Yeah.
um,
From yeah.
so you're familiar, Hayan, have you heard the Samaritans?
I've heard of the term Good Samaritans, and I Googled that one time. That's all I know, really.
There's a big community in Nablus, and then there's also another community in like Holon, I believe, in Holon, in Holon
Yeah,
or somewhere. Yeah, but
but
mainly in Nablus, and there was a split between Jews and Samaritans during the ancient period, and they have continued their presence in the land, whereas Jews were expelled during the Bar Kokhba revolt, but there were people who remained, but Samaritans have remained on the land. They continue to speak their variant of Hebrew, and it's a completely indigenous identity, and they're amazing. I recommend everyone who travels to the West Bank go to Nablus and visit them, for sure.
and there's been no separation
Severance.
from the land and
Yeah,
the Shomanim. They've been there
they're
from the
rooted.
beginning, and
Yeah.
it's a bit of a controversial if you see them as they're discussed in the Tanakh, the Hebrew
Yeah,
Bible.
there's some beef. Yeah.
Yeah, because the way it's written, I
Mm.
mean, if you ask a Samaritan, they'll say, oh, what we call ourselves Samaritans. It's like an endonym. It's a name that
Mm.
was given to them.
But
I think it's
it's
called
not
an
what we
endonym.
still call it though. Yeah.
I mean, imagine. I mean, like I don't know if you remember the word Eskimo.
Yeah.
It's apparently quite insulting to the
They
Inuits
don't call
because
themselves that. Yeah.
it was a different tribe telling the white people that those people are the Eskimo, but the
Mhm.
actual Inuit wouldn't call them. That was like a
Yeah,
derogatory term, but it's
like
stuck.
Romani and the G word, like
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
yes, but it's stuck with the Inuit. That name's and now we've kind of figured out that that's not okay.
yeah,
Mhm.
With the Samaritans, it's stuck because that's what the Judeans were calling them to kind of say they're not the descendants of Yosef.
I
So the
see.
Yeah.
Samaritans will say the Samaritans will say that
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Jews are the descendants of Judah,
Yeah.
which we also say. That's what we say,
Mhm.
but that they are the descendants of Yosef,
Yeah.
which the Judeans did also agree with until at some point there was some kind of rift, and the word Samaritan comes from the Hebrew Bible,
Mm.
calling them no, they're not. They were replaced. The Ashurim, the ancient Ashurim, they took
Yeah.
the original Samaritans and then put these other people in place, and they're not really the Bnei Yosef. We call them Shomanim because the city, their capital city is called Shomron.
Yeah.
So they're, you know, it was a way of dismissing them as not really, our brothers.
Authentic. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Exactly. What do you know what we claim they are? Do we claim they're Moabites? Do we claim they're Jebusites or something non-Israelite? Or are they like just a branch off of Jews who have their own unique identity?
Um, so when you say we, I do think that they are the Bnei Yosef, so Bnei
Yes.
Yosef, right? Bnei Ephraim, Menashe, and Levi also because the Kohanim were everywhere, right?
Yes.
And
100%. Yeah. There's still a high priest today who operates. Yeah. Yeah.
so exactly. So Abud, he's from the tribe of Levi,
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So who I had the pleasure of meeting I spent Shavuot with the Shomanim,
Beautiful.
and just a beautiful, beautiful time. But so when we say we, I think that they really are
Yes, yes. I should say
nature.
the writers of the Tanakh, like
But
what they see.
so in the Tanakh, there's only that one chapter, and then
Yeah.
there's already spoken about the Shomanim. But then Chazal later in the Mishnaic time, in the Mishnah, they'll say that they are Kutim. They would call them Kutim.
Mm.
And Kutim, they came from this land. Kut, I don't know where they
We
think
don't
Kut
know.
was. I've never heard of this
Yeah.
place, Kut. No, it would be interesting to look up if there was some kind of historical Kut, but they were called Kutim, and that's their explanation. It's like a write-off. It's like I humbly disagree.
And they're Jewish, like,
It's controversial. What?
and they're Jewish, like they're being written off
They're
as
not Jewish,
Well, so
but they're Israelites, but not necessarily Jewish,
Oh,
if
I
that
see.
makes sense.
so,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So they don't claim to be Jewish because they're not from the tribe of Yehuda.
Okay.
Jews,
Yeah.
our tradition is that we come from the tribe of Yehuda. There were 12 tribes,
Right.
Yeah.
and then Judah was in the south, which is where Yerushalayim and Hebron, Al Khalil,
Yeah.
that whole area was at some point back in the day was Judea, and that's where the Yehudim were from, the Jews were from, and then, but there were 12 tribes. The other 10 tribes plus Levi that was everywhere. Levi they had this special rule where they had to be in different cities. The rest of the tribes, they were in the north and they had their own kingdom called the Kingdom of Israel. That's why I say the Shomanim, they're Israelim. They're the native Israelim. Jews are kind of this funny thing where we're B'nai Israel. We're one of the children of Israel.
Jacob. Yeah.
We developed our own separate, we distinguished ourselves from the Israelim in the north and started to call ourselves Yehudim, Jews.
Yeah.
And then there were fights. There were fights between the kingdoms. There were fights with Egypt, and there were fights with Syria, ancient Syria.
Yeah.
But then there were also fights between this kingdom of Israel,
Israel and Judah.
where from, and the Jews. So,
not to make things even more complicated, but when Assyria destroyed Israel, there were a lot of refugees who came from Israel down to Judah. And so there was those who we today would call Samaritans, but some assimilated into the Judahite identity and brought their books. And that's why we have some overlap between what we perceive to be the religion from Israel and our own version of events in the Tanakh.
And by the way, vice versa, because when the Jewish temple is destroyed, the second Jewish temple is destroyed by the Romans, and it becomes illegal under Roman colonial law for the Jews to be in Jerusalem. At a certain point, it was absolutely forbidden for them to be in Jerusalem, and there was an ethnic cleansing in Judea. All the leaders, the Chazal, we call them Chazal, they moved to the Galil, which was originally part of the kingdom of Israel, right?
Yeah.
So it went both ways. I mean, my personal theory is that there's the Prushim and the Stokim. You're referring to the Pharisees and the Sadducees.
Yeah,
you're familiar. We're all familiar with these terms.
Pharisees have oral law. Sadducees did not follow the oral law. Most in the Western world know about this because Jesus would fight with the Pharisees, who he claimed were like really meticulous with certain legal rights within Judaism. But 100%. Yeah.
So
and also Pharisees were mainly Kohanim. They were mainly Levites from
the Pharisees.
The Sadducees. Yeah.
Sadducees. So my theory, my unconfirmed theory, I haven't heard anyone else say this, but I have this hunch that they were actually Shomanim trying to influence politically the Judea, which was in the south. And I say that because the name Sadducees after Tzadok.
Yes, right.
Tzadok was, but lots of Shomanim, their last name is Sadok.
Interesting.
And then I realized that they were implementing actually some practices, Samaritans' practices, trying to get that started in Judea. And it dawned on me on Shavuot. Shavuot is the holiday of are you Christian?
No, Muslim.
Me, I'm Jewish.
You're Jewish. Okay. No, Hayan, I was asking Hayan
Yeah.
because you're talking about because you heard about the Shomanim through Good Samaritan, which is a Christian thing.
Yeah,
But
you just
anyways,
hear the term Good Samaritan everywhere.
wait, where was I? What did I say?
Oh, sorry.
Yes, because I was going to say if you haven't heard the word Shavuot, you might have heard the word Pentecost.
Uh-huh.
If you're Christian, but if you're not Christian, maybe you haven't heard. Pentecost is Shavuot.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay, I was there with the Shomanim on Shavuot.
Oh.
Yeah. It's
Which
English
is
for
the
weeks. For the English audience, it means weeks. So yes.
seven weeks. 7 weeks after the holiday of Pesach.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's what Shavuot 7 sevens. And I realized they celebrate their Shavuot not 7 weeks after Pesach, but 7 weeks after the first Sunday after Pesach. Okay, so there's Pesach, then you wait until Sunday, and then there's 7 weeks.
Okay.
What does that remind me of? The Sadducees. Because that's what they were trying to get. There was their main beef with the Pharisees. Is the Pharisees are like, no, there's Pesach, and then after 7 weeks, Shavuot.
Yeah.
And the Sadducees were like, no. They were trying to convince the Judeans that you wait until Sunday, then you count 7 weeks, and then you do Shavuot. And that's what the Shomanim they do. That's what they do until today.
Wow. I never put that together, actually. I think your theory has some decent validity to it. That's actually crazy. I never thought about that. Wow. There might definitely be some validity to that. I don't want something to look into for sure. I don't want to switch topics too abrasively, but I do want to talk a little more about your personal activism. And so I don't want to spoil it because I have followed it on Instagram, but you've done a lot of work in the West Bank recently, specifically for a Christian village. And I want you to talk about the work you've done and share the history of that village, because I think it's very, very important for our audience to hear.
Okay. So Al-Makhrur is basically under attack right now. Just today, there was a restaurant just demolished. Or it was yesterday. I'm just found it right now. But Al-Izbeth, I think it's called. I'm not sure exactly. It's like you've heard of Jala Jungle. Jala Jungle, it's right next to Jala Jungle. Just demolished.
Yeah.
Without any warning. Beautiful, beautiful restaurant. Okay. And that's just one example of how it's under the crossfire. Certain people have decided that the next step is that we want to build here. Okay, but there's people live there, right? So and it's just so absurd what's going on. So I got involved in, I guess you want to call it activism.
Yeah.
But 4 years ago. And I went to Misfariyata.
Yes, in the Southern West Bank. Yeah.
Right. And that's when I really, really understand what is going on from another vantage point that I'd never seen before.
Yeah.
I know you asked me a slightly different question. You want me to talk about Al-Makhrur.
Feel free to take it in any direction. You also, Masfariyata is a situation that also needs to be talked about, so feel free.
Right. There is a movie that I hope everyone please watch. Ein Eretz Acheret. I'm not sure how it's called. In English, it's called No Other Land.
Mhm.
Is the story of Basil, Adra, and Yuval Arham. I used to go and visit Basil when I realized something. If you were to ask me, and I really, I want to, before we're finished, I want to go back to Al Makhrour before we finish this. I want to get back to, maybe we can finish with that because it's super, super like relevant to right now. But let's go back a second. If you were to ask me in 2019, 2020, okay, what I thought of what was going on here and what I would call Israel,
Sure.
I would honestly tell you, even being a critical thinker, whatever, an artist, creative voice, whatever you think of me, I would tell you that the Palestinian narrative is fake. It's a lie. I'm not telling you what I think now. I'm just trying to illustrate how impossible it is to understand what is going on here from the outside,
Mm.
and how impossible it is for someone here to understand what's going on here unless you're ready to see,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
To have
Yeah.
that dialogue. It is really, really, because I would tell you that I would tell you in 2019 that there's no apartheid. That if anything, I would tell you that there's a apartheid against Israelis because Israelis are not allowed to go to Area A. They're not allowed to go to Bethlehem. They're not allowed to go to Nablus. When I went, I'm technically not allowed to go there. When I went to Abud and his community, actually not allowed to go there because, and I would say it's because in the part now Israel did that also. That's not the Palestinians who want Jews
Exactly.
not to go to A. It is apartheid, but it's Israel doing that.
Mhm.
Okay, I didn't
Yeah.
realize that at the time. So I would tell you clearly there's some kind of propaganda going on. If anybody else is thinking that Israel's the apartheid, what is, I would say my next door neighbor is Lebanese. So I would say my neighbor is Lebanese. How is that possible in an apartheid? And she has Israeli citizenship. And I know that I wouldn't call them Palestinians at the time. I would call them Israeli Arabs. I would call them Arab Israeli. I don't know what you're supposed to call them in Israel, but whatever. It's not the Palestinians.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I would say, look, there's Arab Israelis, and they have equal rights. They don't have equal rights, but I thought that they had equal rights.
Mhm.
So somewhere along the line, as I'm um, as I'm creating a presence for myself on Instagram with my artwork,
Mhm.
okay, I'm now I have potentially exposed to other points of view, but I'm
Mhm.
not looking for it. All I'm doing is just like if you look pre like 2019, it's like a like completely different page. It's
Yeah.
completely different. But then what happens is Shina Abu Akleh is killed.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Al Jazeera reporter. Yeah.
On my Instagram, I'm making my stuff. People say art is political, and that's 100% true. In this time, everything is political. In this time, I like to say everything is spiritual. Like, do we all want to become politicians? I don't know, but it's spiritual. Every political sounding message that I'm saying is a spiritual message, right?
Yeah.
Now, I'm as I say, like people will say everything. Art is political. How I'm doing art is I always approach art as exploring an inner landscape, which has nothing to do with being political. So there's an inner landscape I'm putting onto a canvas not looking for, not I just all I'm doing on Instagram is just a platform to put, I made this, I think it's beautiful, someone else think it's beautiful, here it is. Then Shirin Abu Akleh is killed. The media always gets in front of a story, so I don't think anything of it. It's just like, oh, I don't even think that she's killed on purpose or anything like that. All I know is, okay, because I'm now exposed a little bit to stuff on social media that I wouldn't see
Sure.
anywhere else.
Mhm.
Okay, that's interesting. Some journalists that I've never heard of got caught in this crosshairs. Who knows who did it? That's not what really changed things. What really changed things is her funeral.
Mhm.
The police at her funeral was so clearly offensive.
Yeah.
Like there's no discussion. This is their family at her funeral, and they're beating up the family, and the casket falls.
Yeah.
And I reach out to some friends, like and I do make certain messages on social media saying this needs to be condemned by the government.
Yeah.
People then reach out to me and say, I think somebody like hacked into your account. And I'm like, no, that's actually what I believe. Isn't that what you also believe? And then I realized that no, that's not what they also believe. And so in 1 minute, in just one, or a period of like a couple of days, 1 week, everything changes. Like, oh, something is so deeply wrong with you know with this society.
Yep.
Deeply wrong. And then like, okay, there's things that I believe that are wrong. They're really wrong. And what I do is I reach out to, I'm like, I'll go into Instagram and reach out to other artists. So I think I write like artist Gaza, find somebody, follow him right away, reach out, like see that he posted something morning, Shirin Abu Akleh, I say my condolences. And that's the end of that. He didn't want to have, but he thanked me, but he didn't want to have any more like contact with me. I can only guess what that reason is, and I completely understand. But what that does do is completely change the algorithm, and suddenly getting lots of content,
Yep.
lots of content. This is happening here, and this is happening here, stuff that I've never seen. And then I hear about Mustafa Yatta. I contact somebody and say, I don't even believe that this is. I see a video of a settler, okay, which I wouldn't have called a settler at the time. I would have called him a Jew. Called him Jew with Tzitzit. He's got Tzitzit on. He's got a mask because it's still Corona time, so he's got a mask, like masking his face. You don't see who he is, but he's clearly wearing Tzitzit, and he has the peyot. And he throws a rock at a car. There's two girls in the car, girls that I eventually meet these girls because they're also activists at Mustafa Yatta. And what? This is not possible. Like, how can you be wearing tzitzit and peyot and doing that? And Hadar, my wife, is like, yeah, that's for sure not possible. That's not like, that's obviously Shabbat, like in disguise as religious Jews, right? And I'm like, I don't know. I think that is just what happened. Like, that's crazy that they're so off the derech to be doing that. But like, I'm like, okay, I'm going to visit. I contact someone, I'm like, I need to see this with my own eyes because I don't know what's true. Like, I'm seeing this through social media. And he's like, yeah, you're welcome. Here, come to this address. And as I drive there, I feel like, what am I doing? There's going to be a lynch. I'm going to be lynched on the spot. And it's just the most beautiful serene feeling that was completely the opposite of what an Israeli might think,
Yeah.
you know, would be. Just beautiful people. And there I meet Basil,
Hmm.
and they had already been making this film for like 5 years.
Mhm.
Um, I recommend everyone see it.
Yeah.
Everyone, please. I really believe it will revolutionize everyone's soul. It's like that.
Hmm.
That like it will change.
Mhm.
It will change things.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I have a question. Just it sounds like you grew up and you were indoctrinated into the Israeli sort of like mentality and the dogma of like there's no apartheid, and in fact it's actually the other way around, stuff like that. But what I notice from your story is that Shireen, you considered her a human. So there was something missing from your indoctrination, in my opinion, because everyone you spoke to, from what I understand, they didn't really necessarily see her as human, and so they didn't think it was worthy of condemnation. And
Hmm.
so what is missing for you to have considered her a human being and to have sympathy for her family at the funeral? Whereas many Israelis maybe might think like, oh, they're terrorists, they deserve respect or whatever like that, you know?
I have no idea.
Yeah. That's because
I have
that's
no.
what I think is like the main narrative is like even if she was a
Yeah.
journalist, whatever, she was a journalist for the terrorist organization of Al Jazeera, that's Hamas and all this stuff, you know,
Exactly.
like there are a bunch of
Yeah.
rationalizations and justifications that people go through to like, and even if they see like a Jewish anti-Zionist, they think he's brainwashed, they'll call him names, they say
Self-hating.
this and that, you
Yeah.
know. So
Hmm.
it's like there's a lot of barriers to stop someone from digging in deeper and questioning more. And so I'm just curious what made you, just like I am curious with like Elijah. And like for me, for example, when it came to Syria, like a lot of people cast doubts on whether Assad was actually this megalomaniac or whatever. And I had to discover it on my own because my parents told me, yeah, he's an evil dictator, but I did my own research as well. And to at some times, like I was swayed by a lot of the conspiracies and
Mm,
the Russian propaganda that would come out about the chemical weapons attacks and how, you know, they were actually planted and
right.
Assad doesn't
Right.
have them
Right.
and stuff like that. And so I like eventually it just I just had to speak to witnesses or speak to survivors, and this was like to me that was what kind of cemented it for me.
Humanizing moment.
And
Yeah.
when it came to when I was looking into like leftism, communism, Marxism, and stuff like that, I was kind of get it going more towards like justifying authoritarianism to establish a communist state or whatever. And so I was leaning more towards that. But what snapped me out of it was at one point there was like protests in Cuba. And I asked my friends around me, I'm like, okay, this is a time to stand in solidarity with the people of Cuba, right? And they're like, no, these are infiltrators, these are traitors. Like you need to like suppress them violently. These are like American collaborators who want to overthrow the Cuban government, the socialist government. And like to me, that sounded a lot like when Assadists would say like me as a Syrian being against Assad, I'm just an imperialist or I'm just a NATO shill or whatever. Like these are the kinds of things that would make me snap out of it and realize, oh wait, like there's something bigger going on here. And so like I just wonder like if there was those moments for you because that like you said Shireen's funeral was that moment for you. And so like yeah, I definitely like resonated with that when you were
No, that's
describing it.
I will
that's
also
so.
add that
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
you could have latched on to what the IDF propaganda was at the time. They said that Hamas basically was waving flags at the funeral, and that forced the police and the IDF to intervene and cause the attack on the family and the funeral goers. Right? You could have latched on to that narrative and said, of course they had to do that. Right? They're bringing order to the situation. What made you, like Hayan said, come to that humanizing realization moment? Because I don't think most Israelis would naturally see that. I mean, the only reason I'm in the position where I am, my humanizing moment was being able to speak to Palestinians at a young age, to hear their narrative, their story, their truth, and their trauma, and relate it a lot back to my own as a Jew. And so I'm interested if there was some experience, at least in the past, that allowed you to elevate these people beyond the level of just these people that you're occupying and have to suppress because they're terrorists.
So my question is really the opposite.
Mm.
My question is what happened, because of course I saw Syrian as human. Like
Mm.
the question is really, really the opposite. And I
Mhm.
don't have the answer. I really want to understand the answer,
For
which
sure.
is how do the majority of Israelis not see Syrian as human?
And it's a problem that we frame the question that way. Like, how are you
Exactly.
thinking
Yeah.
of them as human?
Like,
You're the weird
wow,
one. Well, it's true.
I'm
You're
so
right. You're the
amazing.
normal one. You're
I
right.
speak
Like, that's
Syrian.
how everyone should view it. Like, people should
Mm.
view everyone's life as sanctified and, worthy of having the opportunity to nourish and be and flourish
Yeah.
and to be alive. Like, yeah. So go
In a
ahead.
so-called Jewish society, which is supposed to elevate those values to the utmost respect, yet we see them constantly transgress them. And I guess that leads in back to our initial question, right? Why are you doing what you're doing in the West Bank, right? Going back to the village you mentioned earlier, I want to know also, is there anything you're taking from your Jewish roots that's propelling you towards this work in the West Bank?
Yeah. So before we move on, like I think we really should ask this question.
Mm,
Like really, because I don't have the answer, but there is an
mm,
answer.
Well,
mm.
yeah.
What really is making Israelis uh, believe that Shirin is not a human? We really got
Well,
to like the more we
mm.
unravel that, it it will help. It will
Uh,
help.
I would personally say to have a project such as this, to have a situation in the West Bank of total apartheid, you cannot enact such a situation without first viewing the population you are occupying and imposing apartheid upon as being less than a full human. That's the only way you can do this is by viewing them as being less than human.
Absolutely,
And,
absolutely.
and,
But
and
how does it happen? How does it
how
happen?
does it
That's
happen?
the
It's
real question.
fear, exploiting fear, like the Amalek and all of that. You know what I mean? Like considering a whole population, even the babies, as people who are going to grow up and try to take you out. That's something that a lot of Jews grow up with. A lot of Zionist Jews grow up with, and they've internalized that for years. And most of it is also just that it's like as a Canadian, I didn't know about indigenous cultures and stuff like that. It was
Erasure for sure. Yeah.
yeah, like we learned a little bit about it in social studies as kids, but we didn't really learn about like reconciliation and all that stuff. It wasn't until like I grew up and read about land back and the movement of reconciliation and how even what we're doing in Canada is like all platitudes. It's all like, window dressing. We're not actually reconciling and coming to terms with our occupation of this country. And in some ways, like God forbid, but Canada is kind of like if you're an Israeli, I imagine you're looking at Canada and thinking, I'm looking into the future of Israel right now. Do you ever think
Mm.
that way?
Yeah, I think in Manitoba, I think there is like a native leader.
Yeah, yeah. I
Wherever,
forget his name, but I know what you're talking about. He's NDP. Yeah.
I think that's a really good start. I'm not sure what his. I think just having more indigenous people who understand what the land needs
Mm.
to be um,
Stewards.
stewards,
Yeah.
yes, of the land. That's a
Yeah.
good first step.
hmm
Um, as for me, so I do bring my my I'm definitely informed by who I am.
Mm.
I consider myself Jewish.
Yeah.
I I'm Jewish by ethnicity.
Yeah.
Mm.
Now, I won't call myself religious. I'm definitely part of the religious community. I consider myself a believer.
Mm.
I can I consider myself spiritual,
Yeah.
and I am part of the religious community, but I'm kind of ostracizing myself because going to Beit Knesset at this time, like, and not like I don't know who you are, who I'm sitting next to, like what have you done in the past 10 months? I don't know. And
Yeah.
I'm not okay with it.
Yeah.
So I have to find a way to stay part of. the community because we're always part of a community.
Of course.
Mhm.
And yet, like, what happened is not okay. What continues to happen right now is not okay, and the need to speak about that.
Hmm.
Make sure that this changes, never happens again. And it is, I consider it a duty to do that.
Hmm.
That's why, like, when I do go to Masfariyata, I come back. And I come back again, and I figure out, okay, what is my role in making sure this land, there's something better in store for this land,
Hmm.
for everybody who considers themselves part of this land,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
right? And eventually, I'm meeting amazing people. It's a very, very small community
Hmm.
of Palestinians and Jews, and some of these Jews consider themselves Israeli. Some of them consider themselves Jews in occupied Palestine. You introduced me as Israeli.
Yeah. Yeah.
We spoke about this a little bit. I think it was before it was recorded,
Hmm.
but maybe we're talking about that. Israeli is an indigenous term for the
Yeah.
Shamanim. I
And
consider
also,
myself
just from a realist perspective, Israel is a state. It's a nation state. It has a government. It has a constitution. It has a civilian population. It has ID cards. And, if just from a realist perspective, I'm not the kind of guy who, like, I can't say the word. It's like, it's not like Voldemort, he who must not be named. Like, I understand, like, when you're speaking about it, you need to address the
right,
reality that is,
Hmm.
a country that the world acknowledges. It's, recognized in a lot of international bodies, and so we can have, like, when I refer to like a Palestinian living in occupied Palestinian territory, I use that language. But if I'm speaking about someone with an Israeli citizenship, like, I will say, like, they have an Israeli citizenship. I can't really go around that. So it's just like, I get
Yeah.
that people
but
have, like, they police their words and stuff like that. I think, like,
yes,
we're
I think on an even deeper level, David's also hitting on the fact that the name Israel itself is something that descends from the land, right?
right.
In Islam, Jacob, Yaqub, right?
And you were talking about
Yaakov, and
de-radicalizing that the term Palestine and the terms Israel. Like, I kind of, is that what you were talking about? Like, kind of desensitizing us to how much that word might trigger some people.
right. And Israel is also triggering,
Hmm.
and it's been hijacked. It's been
Of
co-opted,
course,
and it's part of
absolutely,
it. And it's really
absolutely.
difficult to say I'm Israeli without identifying what people. Um, uh, what's the word? For that to
Associating.
come across as identifying with the Israeli state.
There's connotations involved in every word. Like,
yeah.
Right. And I just want to add, I just want this really important point that so lots of this very, very small knit community of Palestinians and Jews, some of them, some of the Jews will identify as Israelis, but
hmm
not everybody.
Mm.
There's many Jews that I'm meeting that consider themselves to belong to this land
Mm.
and are not sure if they want to identify as Israeli.
Hmm.
And on a few, and there is a couple of Jews in particular that I'm thinking of that they identify as Palestinian. He lives in Haifa, but
Mm.
and he has an Israeli citizenship, just like
hmm
many Palestinians
Yeah.
have Israeli citizenship. But he completely rejects
And Haifa
this.
has a nice, like, amount of people that are like that, right? It's like a very mixed city from what I understand, and has a lot of, like,
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
extremists you could call, or just like activists that are,
very mixed.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'd love to
So,
visit Haifa someday.
and if you ask me, I sometimes I get that like I, I lean into the Palestinian identity, how much that is an authentic identity for me.
Mm.
We're going to say this land is going to be called Palestine. If that is a real possibility, it
Mm.
is in one of the possible futures that we can envision is that
Yeah.
this land from the river to the sea will be called Palestine, in which case
Mhm.
I will be a Palestinian. I will have Palestinian citizenship.
Mhm.
Unless there's an ethnic cleansing, which we want to
God
prevent,
forbid.
or is not in the plans, and as we don't have to worry, right?
Mm.
But so that is a possibility. Another possibility is that all becomes Israel, and then everyone's called Israeli, but the Palestinians can still feel that they're Palestinian
Of course.
because
Mhm.
they are Palestinian. And
Yeah.
another possibility is that we can call it Canaan.
Yes.
Canaan. Or the
The
Holy
name of
Land.
other people's, or Canaan is by far, in my opinion, the best, right? Because the Israelite identity, the Palestinian identity, all of it has authentic roots within the Canaanite identity, which hails from
Yeah.
the land of Canaan, right? It's the one thing we can all point back to and say, we share this, right? We are full and equal participants in this land and its identity and its name. And so that's why I'm personally partial to it, but I want to hear your take on that, David.
I completely agree. That's where we're like our vision is merging in this respect.
Ultimately,
Um,
like we would like for the whole region to have unity and to be
Common
one name.
identity.
I'm partial to
Yes.
Sham personally,
and
but
we have to figure out, once again, I'm an artist. Political scientists have to understand how we can live without these borders because
Yeah.
Balad Al-Sham didn't have those borders.
Mhm.
Exactly.
We have to get back to that, but
Yeah.
that no people are entrenching on the other people's rights
Right.
because
Yeah.
there are distinct identities,
Mhm.
but there is a unifying identity, the Canaanite identity.
Yeah.
I see this land having three, and then if you want to distinguish between Yehuda and Bnei Israel in the north, four
Mhm.
identities, and then there's also the
Mhm.
Jews, five real core identities that are
Mhm.
distinct and yet unifying. That we have
Yep.
the unifying characteristics.
Mhm.
Palestinians, they were the ancient Plishtim.
Mhm.
The Canaanim, they were the ancient Canaanites. And then the Yehudim and Bnei Israel as Yehuda and Israel. And then the Jews came later. It's a little bit confusing to me, the story of it. But they keep their story secret. They have their
True.
inner circle where they teach
Yep.
their story, and you have to kind of become part of that inner circle. So many Jews, they don't know what the inner circle actually believes.
Yeah.
Um, so there's also the Druze. Okay,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and we are all indigenous to this land,
Of course.
Mhm.
and but Canaan came first.
Yeah.
Let's face it.
Yeah.
And what historians kind of piece together is that the Plishtim were from the Aegean Sea,
Greedy.
entering the
Yeah.
late bronze the bronze fallouts,
But
where
all of
many
these
different.
identities have become completely intermixed right now, right? Like,
Now we're all part, like, okay, so there were the Canadian, then there was the bronze the fallout of the Bronze Age, where
Philistine.
the
Yeah.
Hittite society completely collapses, Egypt completely collapses, and then there's people of the Aegean Sea who do this conquest in Eretz Canaan. At the same time, that's the where the story of the Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus, takes place.
Mm.
And then there is also a conquest on the Israelite side. Like the Israelites entering Eretz Canaan was a conquest
mhm.
in
Mm.
the colonial sense, where they were
Mm.
slaves. So it makes it really, really like it puts it on his head. But you read the Sefer Yeshua, the book of Joshua, and it's like, okay, this was a massacre.
Yeah. It was a genocide.
Okay,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so historians say it was actually these people from the Aegean Sea, and that Joshua didn't even exist,
Yep.
and that what the
They took
Israelites were
credit.
doing was
Yeah.
they took
They took credit for
exactly.
the genocide they didn't commit. Yeah.
That's what the historians say.
Yeah.
I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think it really was
Mm.
somewhere in the middle. But and that you know how a terrorist group will take, it's just some lone wolf, and then a terrorist group will say,
Mhm.
we did it.
Yeah.
That was
Exactly.
and it wasn't,
Yeah.
right? And especially back in the day where it was cool. It was like a cool thing for the Egyptians to say, we smashed those people
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
just decimated those people. And they make poems about how they just crushed this people and this land. We took it. And so the Israelites wanted to do the same thing. It's like, hey, we're a people too. And we smashed those Canaanites, according to historians, this just didn't even happen. But I think that it did, but it was the Plishtim and the Israelites at this. And then once the Canaanites were kind of only in Lebanon, and their presence here was just, they had no power really.
Yeah.
They
And
still had a lot of power in Lebanon.
yeah.
Then the story in the Tanakh is between the Plishtim and Israel. They're fighting each other, not the Canaanites.
There's
But
actually,
now,
sorry, go ahead.
just to finish off, but then so the Canaanites never stopped existing there. It's just that they politically they had no power. Then there's the Plishtim who existed there, and there's a question if the historical story of the Plishtim is actually true, or if they also were always there, because the Chumash, the Torah, calls Beersheba Eretz Plishtim. The historians say that they came from the sea, and they had this pentapolis on the sea.
Yeah.
But then what about Beersheba? We call Beersheba Eretz Plishtim. And by the way, in the Torah, the Torah never calls this land Eretz Israel. Never once. The Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu never once calls this land Eretz Israel, but it does call it Eretz Plishtim. Like,
Interesting.
deal with that. Deal with that.
Yeah.
Your Torah does not call it Eretz Israel. We traditionally call it Eretz Israel, but the Torah doesn't, and does call it Canaan in the north and in the mainland, and the Negev is Eretz Plishtim, the land of Palestine. So
Interesting.
and that's where Isaac lived. That's where Abraham lived. Yaakov, they lived in Beersheba, Eretz Plishtim.
Yep.
But today, just to finish the point, sorry, I'm just going off on a tangent.
No, this is amazing. Yeah.
Today, anybody who comes from this land, whether you are Jewish, whether you are Palestinian, whether you are Samaritan, whether you're Druze, did I miss somebody? Or Canaanite, you all have each other's heritage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's no way that you didn't descend also from one of these Plishtim.
Yep.
Or a Samaritan.
There you go.
Or a Canaanite.
Yep.
Tamar, like on our father's side, we're Yehudim because we come from Yehuda.
Yeah.
But on our mother's side, we come from Tamar. Who was Tamar? She was Canaanite.
Yeah.
Interesting.
She was Canaanite. Yep. I will also say a reason I think we in the modern era refuse to recognize these influences is, and Hayan will relate this completely, is our notion of sectarian divides amongst communities, right? We believe that all these were individual units in the ancient world, as we have these individual units today that are warring, that refuse to mix, and it's we're imposing something in our modern society upon 3,000 years ago, right? When in reality, I guarantee you, Phoenicians, Israelites, Canaanites, everyone in the land, Philistines, all of the above were mixing. These were not necessarily distinct communities. These were probably one people that had interchanging ideas, interchanging relations. They were interrelated, right? It's imposing the Western nation-state divisions upon 3,000 to 2,000 years ago. But I do also want to mention, going back to the story of Joshua, his invasion of Canaan, there's a third story I've heard about what that is. And it's the ideology that the invasion of Canaan did not happen, but the reason we talk about it is the warnings that justified the genocide of the Canaanites were actually made up by Israelite authors to scare fellow Israelites. So the Canaanites of the Bible are simply Israelites who are wrongdoers, according to the writers of the Tanakh. And they were the ones who basically want to say, these people in the past were wrongdoers, but in reality, it was people in their modern day who were wrongdoers, and they allocated what their wrongdoings were to the ancient Canaanites and said, oh my gosh, there's people that came before us, they were guilty of this, they got wiped out, and so if you continue to act up, we're going to get genocided and exiled. So I wonder if we can fit that third story into the mix.
Is there anyone specific who speaks about that point of view?
There's a few people. I can send you a few articles. Only reason I'm
Yeah.
knowledgeable about this aspect is I took a class on biblical history, but it was like a very secular orientation to biblical history and what the theories are behind it. And so
Okay.
that was one that I was like fascinated by because I'm like, oh my gosh, in Hebrew school, I was just told these people were wicked. They descend from Ham, who the curse of Canaan was imposed. And then from there, these people were wicked doers, child sacrifices, everything in between. And Israelites had to come and genocide them for their wrongdoings and ills. And so I'm like, oh,
Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
So
That is
in
the
reality,
first time that.
Canaanites are synonymous with Israelites, maybe, according to this theory.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
it does seem to be that ancient Yehudim, Israelim, they were Canaanites
Yes.
in language, in culture, and then at some point they felt as though they needed to disconnect
Yeah.
and like um hate, honestly,
Yeah.
just demonize this Canaanite identity.
Yeah.
What happened? How that come about? I have no idea.
The
So
original,
I've never heard this. I've never heard this point of view before. It's like
yeah.
intriguing.
It's actually very interesting. So the OG Canaanites, we talked a little about them, Yonatan Ratosh and
Mhm.
E.G. Haron, they actually had a theory about when this distinguishment happened between the Canaanites and Jews specifically. And they claimed it was at the end period of the Babylonian exile. And the reason for that is that Judaism, in their eyes, was solely a religion. I don't necessarily agree with that. I believe that Jews connotate both an ethnic and religious group in some respects. But their ideology was it was by the elites of the Judean society who were exiled and now are no longer rooted in the land. And so they had to make up an identity to compensate for this fact that they had no connection for the land. Many of them were born in Mesopotamia and not in Judea. And so for them, they could only do that through a religious expression. And that's where they cut off everything relating to Canaanites and revised the Bible. This is what they said. They revised the Bible to make it fit their monotheistic, religious-centered worldview rather than the land-centered, indigenous-centered, Canaanite identity that preceded them. So I think it's a very interesting theory. I have to look much more into it, but that's what the OG first Canaanite thinkers were speaking at the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is what we're
Okay.
trying to get away from is like nationalism and, forced ideology and
100%.
forced
100%.
communities and just stick to regional sort of binds that
Exactly.
have always existed and that are very natural based on where
Yeah.
people already are and you don't have to displace anyone.
Yeah. And honestly,
100%.
well, and David kind of hit on this. When you think about the Hebrew language, it's a Canaanite language. If you listen to ancient Phoenician, a Hebrew speaker is going to understand a pretty decent amount. These were the same languages. They were probably just regional dialects at the time of all Canaanite languages, right? Over time, we like to say, oh my gosh, these were separate nations. They were distinct peoples. No, they were probably just regional dialects, and they probably all had relations with each other. Probably didn't even conceive themselves as different nations. So it's all very fascinating, but I think David hit it right on the nose.
It's going to be an amazing, amazing day when many Lebanese, consider themselves Canaanites,
Mm.
when they realize that the best way to, reclaim their original language of Canaanite is to learn Hebrew, because Hebrew is the only Canaanite language that is still being spoken today. And the
Interesting.
Yes.
Lebanese dialect was probably really, really different, but still understandable.
I thought the
People,
Yep.
Lebanese really want to be Phoenicians though, not Canaanites.
But
the
the
Phoenicians
Phoenician
are,
are Canaanite people. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I see.
yeah. But the reason why people make a difference between Phoenician and Canaanite is a little bit confusing to me.
It's
I,
confusing to me too.
they,
Yeah.
they're really,
It's
it's really, it's they're synonyms.
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And there's
And the
actually
only,
research to back up.
yeah,
I'm going to real quick. There's research to back up that actually Israelites were joining Phoenician voyages across the Mediterranean in their conquerings. They view
mhm,
themselves as one unit and one expansionist empire at the time. So for political reasons, they didn't really make distinctions. Yeah.
Mm.
And by the way, that's another thing that is so messed up. So the name Israel has been co-opted and hijacked, and it's a holy word for us in our
Even in the
culture,
Quran,
right?
it's mentioned a lot,
Hopefully,
right? Shows
Yes.
up a lot.
Bani Israel.
Balu
Yes, of
Israel
course.
in the Quran. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
And Sion,
Yeah.
Sion, holy,
Zion.
holy word, you know, and so much meaning and also mystical meaning.
Yeah.
Completely hijacked. And the meaning of it, you cannot say the word Sion, which in English is Zion,
Yeah.
without thinking of the political ideology.
Of course.
Yeah.
I 100% believe that that was done on purpose.
Mm.
Okay, but then the Hebrew language is also like that because Palestinians. So Palestinians, many Palestinians just instinctively they feel that Hebrew is the language of the oppressor.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes,
That
exactly.
what Hebrew is almost for sure the language that their ancestors spoke.
Yeah. And not even as far back as many people think. In most communities, it didn't die out till the 1500s, right? This was the language many Jews were writing letters to each other in diaspora. So it's not like
Right.
it's this far off language, right? Rashi was writing in Hebrew. All these Jewish thinkers within the diaspora
Absolutely.
wrote in Hebrew. So yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just imagine that, like you are being trained to believe that the thing that is most connected to you is the oppressor.
Hmm.
Mm.
It's all by design.
Yeah.
We got to redesign that.
We
Okay,
have
Mm.
and
to
it's
unlearn. I think we have to unlearn a lot of stuff. Like what you're talking about with de-radicalizing. Like I think a lot of it is just we've inherited, we've learned, we've ingrained, we've internalized. That's what the word I was looking for. A lot of narratives that we just really need to shed off and unlearn so that we can, not be triggered by certain words and not actually like reach
Yeah.
each other with understanding rather than
Yeah.
hostility or fear, especially fear. Like, because I think the number one way to get support from a community is to make them think that like they're all on their own among neighbors that are all hostile towards them, and making them think that I'm
right.
your only source of protection. Assad did this with Alawites. Israel is doing it with Jews. SDF in Syria is doing it with Kurds. Um, yeah, Israel is trying to pitch this idea to the Druze in southern Syria too. Like they exploit fear and try to paint a narrative of all of your neighbors wanting you gone so that they
Mm.
can, you know, it's just like a commercial. Like, they present you like with a problem and then they give you the solution that they were intending to sell you in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Like those TV commercials like of where you're, call now to get the thing. But they'll just have an example of like your life before you have it, and it's in black and white, and she's just like completely struggling to do some very basic task. That's like what I feel like is done in our region, and even of course like worldwide, but making people think that everyone around you is hostile and I'm your only protector. Trump is also doing it too, like with Americans right now and promoting isolationism and stuff like that. But before we forget, could you go back to the city that you were
Absolutely.
yeah,
How
yeah.
much time do we have left? Because I think this
Entirely up to you, but yeah, like
As long as
but
we need
doesn't
to
cut
go.
off.
for sure.
Yeah.
Doesn't a Zoom cut off after 1 hour?
I'm using my university account to do this. We have free extended Zooms, so we're good.
Okay, so yes, I really want to make sure. Like, so let's talk about El Mahura now. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
my my activism, like a few years ago, was based like really mostly Musfariyata. Okay, and then also I eventually met Isa, which is in Hebron. Like we had met each other on like social media, but it was only later that I met him personally after I'd been to Musfariyata a few times. Sorry. Um, Lately, I have been in Bethlehem.
Mm.
Okay, and it's Al Mahur that brought me to Bethlehem, like becoming aware of what's going on there. There's the Cassia family. Their house has been destroyed on Al Mahur land. It's a beautiful area, just a little bit outside of Bethlehem. Bethlehem is also a district, so it's within Bethlehem. But there's the city Bethlehem, and then there's Beit Jala.
Mm.
Then
Yeah.
you go down the city of Beit Jala into this open area. It's beautiful rolling hills. Jala jungle is right there, and then you go down and up again. That's where the Qassia family has their land, completely destroyed a few times. They rebuild.
Just to be clear, by bulldozer or like a rocket attack or?
It's just a coordinated thing, and they come, the military or whatever, they come in on a specific day, boom, 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 destroy it, leave.
Boom, boom, boom with a bulldozer or a rocket?
Boom.
I just want.
I'm sorry.
No,
With the bulldozer.
okay. Yeah, I just wanted to.
The demolition.
All right.
They continue to rebuild, and it gets demolished again. They had a restaurant, a beautiful restaurant there, also demolished. But there was no, I mean, you have to think about it. So why are they not evicted? And it's because it is their land. And in the courts, they will win.
Of course.
The court case keeps getting delayed.
Yep.
But they have the winning case. So they're not evicted. Since they keep coming back. They keep building. At some point there were this Jewish family that moved in. I want to call them settlers, but let's not call them settlers. Let's call them a Jewish family. They're settlers. They are settlers. But think about this. The military or the JNF moves in a Jewish family there. I mean, you talk about anti-Semitism. So you to ask yourself, what do those organizations that take a Jewish family and move it onto this area where it belongs to this Palestinian family, what's that going to do to anti-Semitism in the world? Is it the activists that are standing with the Qassia family? Are they the anti-Semites? Or are they actually making our ancestors proud? The ancestors that were killed in the Holocaust, including my family, they're proud. They're proud of the Jews standing with the Qassia family.
Of course, never again means never again.
No.
But so is it the activist that is being anti-Semitic, or is it these companies, these organizations that are putting a Jewish family onto that land that belongs to the Qassia family, who's being anti-Semitic? And I said this. I said this to I'm not gonna name names like Bezrat Hashem, Taseh Tshuva, Imatel Makshib.
No.
But this guy, I went to speak to him, and I'm like, and he was calling Alice anti-Semitic for being upset that he's on his. Alice is one of the Qassia family, calling Alice anti-Semitic for like being upset at him because he is on her land her restaurant's been destroyed and her house has been destroyed. And I'm like, isn't that amazing that you're on her land? You think you're calling her anti-Semitic, but
it's warped. It's all very warped.
She doesn't even hate you, and you're on her land. She just wants her land back. She doesn't hate you. So how is that anti-Semitic? She wants her land back. But I said to him, what does it mean, Chilul Hashem? Chilul Hashem is when you desecrate Hashem's name. Hashem is what we call Allah. Okay, so Chilul Hashem, who's desecrating Hashem's name right now? I asked him, and like, I asked him, what does that mean? And it's like, when we do something that makes people believe that either Hashem Chas v'Chalila is bad, like, which is not what we believe. We believe that the Creator is good. Okay. Or you make people believe that the Jewish people are bad.
Hmm.
What, and I said, so are you doing an action that's making people believe that the Jewish people are bad?
Mm.
That's what, and it's left at that. Behind the gate, he's behind the gate that they locked so that
Hmm.
Alice can't get into her house.
Terrible.
And I'm talking through the gate that they put with this Jewish star. They put a Jewish star on the gate.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so are you, just ask yourself. I'm like, I'm not
Hmm.
going to give you the answer. The answer is obvious, but you ask yourself, are you doing something to make the world think that Jewish people are just inherently bad and there's nothing we can do,
Of course.
right? Look at what you're doing.
Because
Look at
that
what you're doing.
symbol gets ingrained into your mind that becomes
You're so
associated
correct.
with
Yes.
The people
having your
committing the
home
injustice.
taken away from you.
Exactly.
And yeah,
Oh, another symbol that was co-opted, right?
of
Yep.
course. Yeah,
Syria
absolutely. And apparently Islam, like Muslims used to use it too. Like in the Ottoman Empire, there are
right.
photos of the
If
Star of David being used. Or I
if you
think
go,
back then it was called the
It's in
Star of,
Al-Aqsa. It's
it's
in
on
Al-Aqsa.
Al-Aqsa. Yep.
sorry?
Yep. Because it's on Al-Aqsa Mosque
Oh,
because
wow.
of some architecture. They put it there, not the
I think it
Jews.
was called the Star of, not David though. It was
Solomon. It
the other
was the
one.
Star of
Suleiman.
Solomon. Seal of
Suleiman.
Solomon. Yeah.
Solomon,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, Seal of Solomon. That's what it's called.
Exactly. Yep.
So yeah, we definitely need to. I'm not sure. I wish I had some kind of place to direct viewers who want to learn. I mean, anyone who is on social media can write al-Makhrur,
Yep.
Kisia, Alice Kisia,
Mm.
um, and learn about what's going on. And I believe that everybody has their purpose and their role in this moment. Everyone can think about what they can do.
Hmm.
Honestly, anybody
Yep.
could be financial. Could be financial.
Of course.
If there's no, you don't have a creative way of amplifying this message, you can get in touch with the family, and there's a GoFundMe. It can be financial. It
Hmm.
can also be creative. It could be political. You can go to your representative and say, listen, this is really happening to a family and to an entire community. Because once they already went for that restaurant, which is right next to the Casilla property, like they're going forward with this. And really, the presence of the Casilla family is the hope
Mm.
that we can save this community.
Mm.
They're a really strong family, and they're so resilient. So look, and you were like, look into what's going on and find some way to get in touch with the family. It's very easy these days, and they'll be happy to hear from you. If you have any questions, you can ask them. How can I
Mm.
help? You'll get answers. The question is if you want to.
Mm.
People say these days, there's a saying floating around, everything is political. And I
Yeah.
appreciate that message because even though I said my art, I consider it like
Spiritual.
getting the inner landscape,
Mm.
you know, externalize the inner landscape as opposed to using it as a political tool.
Mm.
Even so, there comes a time where silence is political. You're not talking about this is political. So if we've
Mm.
gotten to this moment in time where even not saying anything is political, so you have to now
Mm.
make statements. You must make statements,
Hmm.
everybody, because
Yeah.
if you're silent, that means you're complicit.
Yep.
So you must make statements and then also action.
Yep.
Mm.
It's not enough to just not be racist. You have to be anti-racist. It's not enough to just
Yes,
be, not an occupier. You have to also be anti-occupation, right?
Yeah.
yes, yes.
It's from a passive role to a proactive role.
Mhm.
Um,
Yep.
so I think this is a great place to, unless anyone had any final
Well,
thoughts, or yeah, go ahead, Elijah.
I want to have a few. I think we should extend this a little bit to talk about a few more topics, namely Zionism. We talked about the term Zion, how it's been co-opted. I want to potentially end on that. Maybe also talk a little more about Cananism, but I do want to state that you brought up how this family is not anti-Semitic, right? They don't hate you; they just want their land back. And to me, that's so powerful. You to be in that situation and not hate the people who are actively committing an injustice to you, right? As a Jew, I make the parallel to many in my family, in my community, who went through the Holocaust and do harbor hatred towards Germans. No matter what you say to them, right? You say they're human beings, they have lived experiences that happened generations ago. They harbor hatred for Germans. I have family who went through the Holocaust who said, yeah, I don't mind if German civilians get killed, right, in the bombing of Dresden, right? And it's so amazing that many Palestinians who are going through this situation say, no, I don't harbor any hatred against the Jewish people. They're beautiful people, beautiful community, beautiful values. I harbor hatred against the Zionist enterprise, which has decimated my community, expelled my grandparents in 1948. It's actively engaging in settlements in the West Bank and continuing that process to this day. But I make a distinction, and I don't hate my Jewish people. In fact, I view them as my cousins, as my family. And to me, that's such a beautiful sentiment, and I'm sure you've experienced it a lot throughout your time in the West Bank and beyond.
It's so powerful to witness, and I've been thinking about that exact sentiment, and how the German people, that the Jewish people harbor hatred for the German people. It's a really important point that you bring up. And it's relevant because I've come to understand and believe that if we want the Palestinians to forgive what happened to them, so the Jewish people, they should start thinking about forgiving the German people and just lift that off their chests, you know?
Yeah.
Because good luck.
Their guilt is actively aiding the situation on the ground. They're arming this genocide in Gaza, right? Germany is one of the biggest financiers of the genocide in Gaza. So I agree with you 100%. The guilt complex of Germany is fueled by the fact that Israel does fuel it, right? They say, look, we will not forgive or forget. I think that's a common sentiment amongst many, especially older Jews in the community. And Germany, it bends over backwards for Israel because of that very reason, because of the guilt. I think many Jews, for the Palestinian situation, have to take the active role and say, we forgive Germany for the Holocaust, right? They committed immense atrocities. We cannot forget them, but we can forgive them, right? We can move forward in a beautiful partnership.
Or at least just, sorry.
And also, it's exactly that sentence. It's exactly that we can forgive. We can't forget, not to hold it against you, but to remember, like, okay, for some reason you can do that. And I can't forget that. But if we want to move forward together, we're in this together, like, we can forgive. We can forgive.
The German people have a responsibility themselves to try to,
prevent that from happening again.
The reconciliation process in Germany is not complete. There's a lot of I think like a lot of like the wealthy in Germany are still families who profited off of the, what I mean? And I know that funding Israel kind of seems like Germany's idea of reconciliation, which is totally backwards. Like Germans have to take a stand against their government and say this is not how we make up for what we've done, by aiding another country to destroy another population.
Helping a people you committed genocide against commit genocide themselves is not reparations, right?
Exactly.
That's just creating another injustice. But because we are short on time, I want to transition to our final topic, and I want to discuss two specific terms. The first one we touched on briefly is Zionism, and then the last one will be Canaanism, Pan-Levantinism, Shamism. The three terms we'll use interchangeably. So I want to start with Zionism, and the question I want to levy at you is I watched a video. I'm sure you know this individual. His name's Rudy Rochman. He's a pretty extremist Zionist guy. He's pretty bad. And in this video, he was recently talking about the term Zionism. And he said, The definition of Zionism, Zion meaning Jerusalem, is simply a return to the land. That's all he defined it as, right? And to me, I was initially outraged. I was even pissed because to me, this is not just a return to the land. It's a staunch form of nationalism that comes at the expense of another people. How can you create a Jewish state in a place where there's not a Jewish majority population, right? And the only answer to that is ethnic cleansing, right? That was the Nakba of 1948. That's what we're seeing continue to this day as a very fascist government from the river to the sea wants one state, Israel, and it's to be a Jewish majority, a staunch Jewish majority at that. And so my question to you is, you have definitely unraveled this term Zionism. What did you initially conceive Zionism to mean? And what, after your experiences, perceive it to mean after meeting Palestinians, after learning of the injustices of this term? How do those two contrast?
So I didn't even realize this was a thing. I didn't realize there was this thing called Zionism. It's so
Mm,
covert, like it's so crazy how I I went to a Zionist school as a
mm,
child, and but we called it a Jewish school,
Hmm.
mm,
and we never heard the word Zionist.
Hmm.
I didn't think
mm,
Zionism was a thing.
Yeah.
mm.
Like the first time I hear the word Zion is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion.
All
I'm
right.
like, oh,
Yeah,
the Zionist, that's not a real thing because that's a made up book. So there are no elders of the Zion. There's
yeah,
Jews, and then why are they calling them the elders? Why aren't they calling it the protocols of the Jewish leaders? So
yeah.
oh guys, because they don't understand our culture, they call us Zionists, and so it's a made up thing.
Mm,
And I eventually, like, only recently realized, oh, that like no, there was this ideology, and that's what
mm.
built this state called Israel, and it I, it's mamash kacha, right? And what I it's in in terms of what you oh, back pretty Rothman.
Yeah, man.
Um,
I'm glad we're on the same page.
why don't you just call it? It's so on purpose. It is so by design to
Mm,
to say, listen, why don't you just call coming back to your land being Jewish?
yeah,
Call it
yeah.
being Jewish because that's what I thought it was, and because that is what it is.
Mm,
I discover that I belong to this land. I first discover at the beginning of our talk. I inherently feel that there's something wrong with the Canadian culture,
Hmm.
and for
mm.
some reason, outsider. I don't know why, but I don't belong on that. I don't. I can belong on that land if I'm invited by the stewards of this land to live there,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But my culture is placed on this land.
Mm,
I just I learn about my roots. I'm Semitic.
mhm,
I come back. That's called being Jewish.
mm,
Now then people start calling me Zionist
mm.
because that's what Zionism is. Zionism is coming back to your land. But no,
I
no,
would say it's
Zionism,
progressive. Yeah,
Zionism was a political ideology to colonize the land,
Hmm.
mm,
but it was marketed to the European communities of Zionism as
Right.
coming back to your land.
yeah,
And this is the fish out of water effect, but this time you were the fish in the water, and someone was telling you you're someone who lives in water, and you were asking yourself, what is this water stuff? Because you've lived in it your whole life. You don't really
mm,
understand that there's like a world that existed above the water. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Okay,
And so it's like if you ever asked a fish like what is water, like how would they know what water is? They all they
Is
know
there a
is that
worldview?
it's
Yeah,
there, you know, it's the or the fishbowl effect or something like, like you can look it up. It's just this like psychological barrier where you're not able to understand anything beyond your reality because it's the default. Like like if I could relate it to somehow to my own personal experience, it's when I first heard the term Salafism. You know, like I grew up as a Muslim. My dad raised me, yeah, like a bit conservative, you could say. And then
Hmm.
I hear this term Salafism, and I begin to understand that, oh, wait, so like, although we love to say that Islam only has one interpretation and there's only one Islam, oh no, there seems to be a few schools of thought here, and Salafism is kind of the
Okay.
mainstream of a lot of Muslim families thinking. And
Hmm.
this is also by design, from my understanding. Saudi funds a lot of religious schools in other countries to kind of have
Yeah.
a sort of mainstream ideology.
And
Yep.
what you're brought up? You're not brought up as Salafi.
Technically, yeah, like my dad, used to raise me on Salafist like standards that you could describe as Salaf, but he never called it that, right? It was just this is
Okay.
the truth. This is what you
So
should think, you know? And so
Yeah.
it was only when I first started hearing that term that I started to realize, oh, like there are Muslims who are anti-Salafism, and there's like
okay.
the world beyond what I've been told is just Islam. There's
So it's a
like
similar. It is a
yeah, it is a
similar.
lot like that's why like it's the best I could relate to my own personal experience, to discover something that you thought was the default is actually just like an option, I guess you could say, rather than the whole thing.
You know,
Okay.
going back to the question of Zionism in this conversation, it's very interesting how David, as you said, in the early days, the way Herzl packaged this to the European empires, I think it was in a letter to Rhodes, the famous British imperialist.
Cecil.
He said, "We're doing something colonial, right? It will not be in Asia or Africa, but it'll be in Palestine. And it'll be something colonial, distinctly colonial." And that's how he was selling it to them. But our current generation, you'll find many younger Hasbara, like Zionist propagandists will say Zionism is decolonization, right? It's Jews returning and building their ancient civilization. I would argue multiple points of that. First of all, I don't think the way Israel is constructed today is built on the framework of how Jewish society was 2,000 years ago or anything like that. But also, how can you deny the fact that you had to expel a population to create your state in the first place? For your state to be created, it had to come at the expense of another people. And it's just crazy to me that they could think that that is decolonization, to uproot a people that have just as much connection to the land as you means decolonization. No, that to me is a form of colonization. And I think indigenous people can commit acts of colonization. A key example of this is Rwanda. We had two ethnic groups that were both rooted
Yes.
in the
Yes.
land. One was bolstered by colonial powers, as the Jews were by the British. The issue was very aligned with the British, right? They were seeking seeking the Balfour Declaration to get a claim to Palestine in the first place. They worked with the British and they tried to elevate their status through the British, through the colonial power over the land, over the Arabs, over the Palestinians. And I make the connection to Rwanda as a very similar practice happened, right? And I do believe that Jews are indigenous to land. We do have a connection to land, but we can simultaneously act as colonizers when we're coming at the expense of another people. But sorry, that was a long-winded response. But David, yeah, back to your points. I'm so sorry.
And I'll take what you say even further. Is that
Mm,
you say that it's today repackaged as decolonization, but
mm,
I'll even add that the original generation, the high up ideology was
mm.
colonial in nature,
Yes.
but it was marketed also to the European population, the Jewish European population, as coming back to
Mm,
the land because for them that was true.
Hmm.
Like
mm,
the Jewish people, like I asked my grandmother. I
mm.
remember I was discovering this Polish composer, and I'm like, oh, my grandmother, she's Polish, and so she would be really proud that I showed her this music. I'm like, isn't that amazing that I
Mm.
found some Polish music? Because it's like you're Polish, and she's like, I'm not Polish. I'm
Yeah.
Jewish. I'm
Hmm.
Yeah.
like they lived in Poland,
Hmm.
Yeah.
but they lived in Poland because of circumstance, right?
Yeah.
But
Before.
where did their grandparents come from and their great grandparents from? They're Jewish,
Yeah.
and they there was always this dream of, oh, we have a homeland, we got disconnected from this homeland, but and so then the Zionist ideology comes along and says, okay, we want to colonize Palestine, we need to replant. We need to uproot the population with a new population. Here are the European Jews. That their sort of dormant dream is this return to their ancient homeland. Let's awaken that.
Yeah.
And say it's possible now. It's actually possible now. Let's, So even like the Jews today, like it's just so messed up. It's so difficult to help people unlearn what's going on, because they're like, what are you talking about? No, this is Israel. This is my homeland. And they're not wrong if they believe that. They're not wrong if they believe that, and if they feel an actual connection with this land. But you got to understand how you're being manipulated. You have to understand that. Why would you call it Zionism?
Yeah.
Why is someone making you call that Zionism when it's just you being Jewish?
Yeah.
Right?
Just an aspect of your identity.
There's a reason why someone's making you say no, making you conflate that with Zionism. There's a reason for it.
It's to create a false dichotomy.
I never considered, like, I'm sorry, what's that?
No, continue.
It's just I never considered that what I was doing. And then when I came here, so I start hearing the word Sioni. I don't hear the word Zionist, but like when I say that, like I'm like, we're praying 3 times a day, like B'nai Yushalayim and like Kibbutz Galuyot. I'm like, I'm davening every day, like that the Jewish people return. I'm like, why am I davening this and not doing it? So I come back to what I perceive as my home, and I don't make a commitment to move here. I'm saying I'm gonna visit. I'm gonna see what's going on, see how much I connect, because I know I don't feel that connection in Mikanakomenisi, I like to call it, but you probably know it as Canada or Quebec. I do have that connection when I move here. My train of thought. Someone help me. Someone help me. What do I want to say?
You're talking about the return to the land and
return to the land. Feel if it's authentic. Feel if it's authentic.
Yeah.
I come back and I tell the story. I've been davening 3 times a day in our prayers. Davening is praying in Yiddish, actually. Yiddish, which is a European Jewish language that has Canaan, has Hebrew in it.
Yep.
And
some Aramaic too. Yeah.
What's that?
Some Aramaic too, to shout out Aram, because Hayan's Aramaic, so we'll come out.
It's actually Aramaic, and so there's Aramaic also, which is Syrian in
origin. Aram. Yep. The people of Aram pioneered it. Yep.
So I'm getting praise. I'm getting praise from Jewish people. I'm like, oh wow, that's Zioni. So, you're Zionist, but I don't hear Zionist because it's just this. I'm learning the Hebrew language. I'm like, that's Zioni. This is an adjective for how you describe me. They're just the Israeli, an Israeli person who thinks what I'm doing is a good thing is calling that Zionist. And I just hear that as I'm just learning Hebrew. This is a word. This is an adjective that I'm hearing. I'm not putting together that, that's the Hebrew word for Zionist, and what's Zionism? That I'm not asking that question yet. I'm just learning Hebrew. Right? Then I learn about what this Zionism thing is. I'm like, oh my God, they were calling me Zionist when they should have been saying, oh, you're
Yehudi.
You're being
Jewish, and you want to learn about your roots,
Yehudi.
So it's really deep. It's so deeply enrooted in language, in a constructed culture where their Israeli public is only seeing a very, very carefully crafted narrative.
Exactly. Yeah.
And empathy is so important. Empathy is important for the Palestinian people right now. So much empathy needed right now for what's going on. And it's a lot harder to have empathy for an Israeli right now. And just ask yourself this question, like, what happened to the Israeli child for this to happen? It doesn't happen overnight. It happens from kindergarten. And I see it happening with my children, and I'm pushing back.
Mm.
I'm pushing back every time I see it in every way that I can. But it happens from kindergarten, and it is a form of abuse.
Mm.
Like, maybe that can help people have empathy for Israeli people, to understand that they're being abused psychologically from the age of kindergarten. They're being robbed.
Jews are
They're
just
being
as much
robbed
victims of Israel as anyone.
in a different way.
100%.
We have to understand it in a completely, one's in a physical way.
Right.
The Palestinians
Well,
are victims in a physical
but
way.
part of what you're saying also is that by tying Jewish identity to Israel, you have endangered the Jewish people even worldwide, right? Like when Israel targets Palestinians and Gaza, anti-Semitic attacks spike worldwide. You
Yeah,
see what I mean?
yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's what I
Also,
think what he's getting at is one people are physically colonized, right? That's the Palestinian
Right, of
people, and another
course. Yeah, yeah.
are mentally colonized, right? And that
No,
would
of
be the
course.
Jewish. Yeah,
Absolutely.
100. Yeah, yeah.
But the
I
idea
do.
that like Israel benefits Jews reminds me of like when people say Assad benefits Alawites. No, he doesn't. They're all
Yeah,
victims to these entities too.
yeah. To think
yeah,
that the only way for Jews to fulfill their aspiration of return to land was through a colonial project is
Hmm.
itself a mental oppression for Jews, in my
Yeah.
opinion. And it's historically like idiotic. I mean, Jews did return to the land multiple times. After the Spanish Inquisition, Palestinian Arabs welcomed Jews in, right? Jerusalem, one of the most common languages from the 1500s up was Ladino, right? The Sephardic Jewish language.
Mhm.
Look at Islam. When Umar ibn al-Khattab liberated Jerusalem, what was one of the first things he did? He spoke to the Roman overseer of Jerusalem and said, "Where the heck are the Jews? It's Jerusalem." Right? If Jews should be anywhere, it's here. And he said, "Man, we kind of kill them all the time. We really don't like Jews." And Umar ibn al-Khattab, the first thing he did as soon as he entered Jerusalem was said, "Get me 100 Jewish families, bring them back to Jerusalem." Right? And a lot of Syrian Jews, because most Jews didn't go that far when they were expelled by the Romans, a lot of them went to Syria, parts of Lebanon. They came back, right? And this is a historical trend, and it was only facilitated, ironically, through the Islamic world, through the Ottomans, through the Rashidun Caliphate, all the above, right? And so it's ironic that Jews said, "Look, we can never get along with the Arabs, so we're going to have to do it through this way. We're going to have to expel them and make our own state," right? Look at 1929, the Hebron massacre. Look at all these times the Arabs were mean to us, right? Well, look at all the times they let you return to the land, right? If you thought the
Absolutely,
only way
absolutely.
to,
And no one learns this. No one learns this history.
it's
In
crazy.
Israel, no one learns this history. It's
In,
100% true what you're saying.
in Hebrew school, I was taught the end. I was basically taught up until the Bar Kokhba revolt for Jewish history, and then history started again in around 1929 with the Hebron riots, right? And to
Too.
say
Of
the
course.
Yeah.
Arabs will never coexist. They hate you. They just do not want you in the land. Like they want you expelled. And I was usurped from all of this Jewish history, specifically under the Islamic era. I'm half Sephardic, and I was never told about this up until much later in my life. And so it's really a tragedy, but we
And
need
this
to
is the
learn this.
curriculum. This is the curriculum
Yeah.
that inshallah we will have in a
Mhm.
Pan-Levant someday.
Yes.
Inshallah,
One
100%.
one of
Amen.
one of my favorite Jewish mystics, the
Mm,
Arizal,
mm,
um, Palestinian Jew,
mm.
writing in Sfat.
Yep.
He spent his childhood in Egypt, but most of his life and all of his writing, he died very young. He died at like 39. But most of his life and all his writing, he didn't. His student did the writing. He spoke and he Chaim Vital wrote everything. Also, by the way, Rav Chaim Vital, also Palestinian Jew.
Mm.
500 years ago. This was something 500 years ago. So you just put the pieces together. Wait, it stopped at Bar Kokhba and then it comes back with Zionism? No,
Yeah.
the Arizal is just, and the Chaim Vital, those are just two examples. The
Mm.
Rav Moshe Cardovo, also
Yep.
a very big mystic, the generation before the Arizal. also writing in Tzfat, and the Shulchan Aruch, which is a Jewish legalist in Tzfat, also about 500 years ago. Everyone talks about the Talmud Bavli, which was written in Iraq.
Yeah, there's the
what is now called
Palestinian
Iraq. There was the Palestinian Talmud, which was written about 100 years before. In Palestine. And that's a few hundred years after Bar Kokhba. Huge, prominent Jewish community in the Galil. So teach all of that. Teach that as an unbroken chain.
Exactly.
That there's always been a Jewish presence here. There's always been not just a Jewish presence here. Right, there's always been a Samaritan presence here. There's always been a Canaanite presence here. There's always been the Plishtim. That you kind of don't hear about them for a while, which is really mysterious to me. And how the Romans and the Greeks can continue to call. One thing I want to say about Palestine is like the Zionist narrative is that it's Bar Kokhba. And then to spite, because Bar Kokhba is successful in regaining Jewish independence of Judea for 2 years. This is about 100 years after the Jewish temple was destroyed. But it's short-lived, and the Romans massacre not just the Bar Kokhba revolt, but just even the Jewish citizens of Judea, and there's a big genocide. And the Jewish, the not Jewish narrative, but the Zionist narrative is that to spite the Jewish people, they rename the land Palestine. And that's not really true. It's not really true. It's not just that why did they pick the name Palestine? So why don't they rename it Canaan? Why did they rename it Palestine? Where are the Palestinian people? Who are the people that call each other Palestinian at that time? Why are what I believe is that you go 500 years before, you have Herodotus, who was the first major Greek historian. He is calling this land Palestine. So for Greek and for Rome, that is their name for this land. It's not something that they just decide to call it to spite the Jewish people. For them, it is Palestine, and that further strengthens the idea that this Plishtim, these Am Plishtim, were one of the sea people.
Exactly.
Off
the
Greeks. Aegean Sea, which was Greek. They probably actually had a Greek dialect. They probably speak a Greek dialect, and for the Greeks, it's natural that they would call. It's funny that today it's almost backwards that Palestine is like the Eastern name for this land and Israel is like the Western name, but it was like the other way around. Abraham came from Ur-Kasdim, which is in modern day Iraq. So Israel was kind of the Eastern name for Canaan. Palestine was the Greek name for this land. And the Romans, as the continuation of Hellenism, excuse me. My bronchitis is like I'm almost over it. It's good. It's good.
If you need a moment, just cough it out.
For the Romans, the continuing Hellenism, for them it's also Palestine. So of course they call it Palestine, right?
Right.
Makes whole sense.
Doesn't it?
Of course, the people that are indigenous to Greece would call it the Greek name. I mean, But like you said, Zionists really say Philistine means what? Invader in Hebrew, right? So they wanted to rename it that of the invaders, of the Greek invaders. Like the Arab Palestinians today are also invaders from Arabia, and they always try to connect these ideas to say that all these groups are not indigenous, right? It's only the Jewish Israelites who are indigenous, despite the fact they were never alone in this land. Jebusites, Moabites, Phoenicians, there were many people in this land, right? So I mean, the Zionist narrative really had to warp history to get us to ingrain this idea.
And that even it goes deeper than Zionism at that point, because now you're talking about the Tanakh, you're talking about the Hebrew Bible, and it's in the Hebrew language that Polish
Mm.
it does mean to infiltrate. So
Yes. Yeah.
what I see it as it's a play on words because there were these people called the Plishtim.
Mm.
Now the ancient Israelites were calling them Plishtim, and they're like I'm Polshim, but it's a play
Mm.
on words, and they do, and it's not the only time they do that. They also do it with Canaanite with Baal Zavuv instead of Baal Zvul.
Mm.
They're called, so
Yeah.
Baal Zvul is one of the names of heaven,
Yeah.
so he's the Baal of heaven,
Yeah.
but they're not
The
going to
owner.
say that. So they call
Yeah.
Baal Zvuv the god
Yeah.
of flies.
Yes. Yeah.
Same thing with Plishtim and Polshim,
Mm.
but there's reason to believe that if the Plishtim they spoke a Greek dialect or a Greek language,
Mm.
a Greek language, that's related to the Greek word for wrestler.
Ironically,
Palestine.
with that in Hebrew. Yeah, exactly.
And why is that ironic? Because
Yeah.
our origin story is that we're wrestling an angel, and then the angel gave us the name Israel because we wrestled.
Yeah.
Mm.
But Palestine is wrestling, Israel is wrestling, and it takes two to wrestle. We're
Yeah.
wrestling each other,
Is
right?
Philistine the same
It's
as
in our name. It's in our names. So
Yeah.
is
Or
Philistine the
maybe
same
we're
as Philistines?
yes.
yeah, the
Yeah. Yeah.
Philistines. Yeah,
Okay.
The
when I say
Philistines.
Philistine, I mean the Philistines.
Okay.
But I mean
Yes.
that's where the Palestinians get their name from. It's not a coincidence, right?
Mhm.
Or maybe it goes even deeper when we are the same people, right? We are one.
I
Yeah.
found it a
I
little.
believe them.
I
I believe
found
that.
it like I thought it was a weird coincidence that the story of David and Goliath is about an Israelite and a Philistine, and about
Yes,
how in modern like day-to-day language, if you call someone a Philistine, you're talking about them as if they're uncultured.
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
Whereas if
The
you
right.
backwards.
but the word
Yeah.
Samaritan is this, oh, good Samaritan, whatever. I always thought that
Yeah.
was like subtle ways that, damn, like it has reached this even,
But
you know what I mean?
that's ancient though. That was put into language like hundreds of years ago. The Good
Yeah, so it's
Samaritan and
just
the
a coincidence. Like
and the
it's like,
Philistine. It's
Yeah.
not. It's definitely not coincidence. It's just older than our generation. It's not. This
right,
is
right,
before
right.
Zionism.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
but
it's
but the way
also it's
that Philistines became known as this uncultured person
Yeah,
and Good Samaritan
yeah.
became known as like, any kind of person that commits a good deed or something in our
Yeah.
right.
colloquial language today, like that always came off to me as suspicious, like how, well, because I didn't know that whether if, it makes total sense. Philistines are Philistinian,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's the same origin.
I mean, it's the
Um,
same origin.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
And but the
yeah,
last
but okay, now I'm getting your point a little bit more.
You see what I
Like
mean? Like,
it's in the language. Like the Palestinians are the Philistines. The Philistines. It's
yeah.
in the language that they're uncultured in at least in the English language. I
uncultured,
don't know
and
about other
when
languages.
you talk about the David and Goliath story, brutes, violent brutes, right?
Yeah, and there's an Israelite character in the time of the judges who goes in and like just kills a bunch of them, and like takes Samson who takes like the house down over them, kills probably a lot of innocents, and we treat him as a hero. And so yeah, very
Right.
dehumanizing language about this population. So yeah, it goes back. It definitely is rooted.
Crazy.
Yeah, yeah. Do we have time for a brief conversation about
Yeah.
Canaanism / Shamism?
Back
How
like
about this? How
You
about
know what we
this?
could do?
How about we,
Save
we
it for
do a
another
second
time.
conversation? Yes, exactly. Let's do a second conversation in the near future because this was like really productive. This was awesome. And I want
mm,
to bring David back in the future. I think that would be the way to go and have,
absolutely.
yeah, more center on Cananism for sure.
Great,
Sounds good.
great.
That'd be a
All right.
pleasure. And this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, David,
Nice to meet you
Aharon, and it
also.
was very nice meeting you. Yeah, this is absolutely great to speak with you. And um, yeah, I will follow you. By the way, guys, like you're very selfless. Like you plugged the Palestinian family. You didn't plug your own username. Where can people find you if they want
I
to follow
have
you on Instagram?
Haddad.
Sure.
Haddad. I'm on Instagram. That's the main place where you can
Okay. I'll
see
leave
see
it.
what
I'll
I'm
leave
doing.
the link in the description, and
Exactly.
people can find you there. And I'll. That's the first thing I'm going to do right now is go find you.
And on Instagram, we'll tag
Okay.
him. We'll direct everyone to David's page and
Perfect.
definitely support him, give him shout outs. And when we post the clips, make sure you amplify them, guys, because this has been a really awesome episode.
Absolutely.
All right.
My pleasure.
Thank you so
All right.
much.
Thank you.
Great.